Most people think building wealth in Singapore is about saving more money or investing in things like stocks or even crypto. And don't get me wrong, those can work very well as well. But if you look closely, there is a large number of Singaporeans who actually build their capital in a very different way, and that is through property. Not just buying one property and holding it, but using property as a stepping stone to grow their capital over time. And what's interesting is this, you don't actually need to start with a multi-million dollar property to get there. In fact, I recently worked with a client who started with a 1.3 million property and within a few years moved into a 2.8 million home. And no, it wasn't luck. It came down to understanding how to use property as a tool to build your capital over time. So before we go into this, if you enjoy content like this, you can consider liking and subscribing. I'll be sharing more insights to help you navigate your property journey with more clarity. Now, when we talk about building capital through property, the first thing we need to understand is this. Property is not just a place to stay, it is also a financial tool. So once you start seeing it that way, the way you make decisions will eventually change. Because instead of asking, do I like this unit, you start to ask also, how does this help me to move forward in my next phase? And this brings us to the first key concept, which is asset progression. You see a lot of agents talking about asset progression, but on a serious note, asset progression is essentially the idea of using one property to move to the next while growing your capital along the way. So instead of buying once and stopping there, right, you are thinking in stages. So for example, someone may start with a HDB, build up some equity over time, and then upgrade to a private property. So over time, as their capital grows, they can reposition again into a different property that better aligns with the market at that point. And to make this more real, let me share a simple example. I had a client who purchased a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit at a mega project at Marymount back in 2020 for about 1.3 mil. If you know, you will know which project. So at that point in time, one question people might ask is why not just go for a 3-bedroom straight away? But the reality was the down payment budget then was around 330k, which was what he was comfortable with. So instead of stretching too much, he made a decision based on what was realistic at that stage. So fast forward 5 years later, he exited that unit at around 1.75 million with a very good $500,000 profits from this sale. And this is where the progression comes in, because through the first purchase, right, he was able to build the capital not just from the price growth, but also from how property works structurally, on top of him having accumulate more savings and his income also appreciated. So when he moved into the next purchase, he was in a much stronger position. He went on to purchase a brand new 3-bedroom unit in the Novena Newton area at around 2.8 million. And if you think about it, if he had waited in 2020 hoping to save more and try to go straight into a bigger property, he might not have entered the market at all. And without that first step into that Marymount project, he wouldn't have built the capital needed to move into the next property. So what this shows is that building capital through property is not just about starting with the biggest unit, it's about starting with what makes sense for you at that point of time and allowing the asset to work for you. Over time, that's what gives you the ability to move into a higher quantum and a bigger property and continue letting your money work for you again. Most people don't get stuck because they make a wrong move, they get stuck because they never make the first move. Now, the second concept we need to understand is the entry and of course the exit. So every time you buy into a property, you are actually making 2 decisions at the same time, your entry and your future exit. But most people only focus on the entry. They ask, can I afford this? Do I like this unit? Does this suit my lifestyle? But often, maybe they might not have think about whether they can exit comfortably in the future, and this is where capital is either built or lost. So if you enter at the right level, even in a stable market, you give yourself room to grow. But if you enter too high, even a good property may not perform as expected. So instead of just asking, can I afford this? A better question is, does this entry price still gives me room to move in the future? And the third concept is also understanding the market cycles. So property doesn't move in a straight line. There are periods where prices move faster, periods where things stabilize, and periods where opportunity appears. And what I have observed is that people who build capital more consistently are not necessarily timing the market perfectly, but they understand where they are in the cycle, and more importantly, they are prepared. And this is where it becomes very relevant to what we are seeing in the market today, because if you look at some of the more recent land sales, there has been a noticeable shift in the pricing already. Compared to earlier projects like Tengah Garden Residences, Villa Bay, or developments like Hudson Place right now, the newer land bids are coming in significantly higher. We are starting to see sites like Holland Link, Dunyan, Dover Rise, JLS all awarded roughly 20-30% higher compared to the earlier batches. And what this tells us is quite important. Developers don't bid based on today's pricing alone, they bid based on what they believe they can sell in future. So when land costs actually increase at this level, right, it naturally sets a higher benchmark for the upcoming launches. And once these benchmarks are set right, the prices will start to adjust. Now at the same time, this doesn't mean that projects coming from these higher land bids are not worth considering. It really depends on how the project is being positioned. You still have to look at things like the break-even price, the developer's launch strategy, the supply and demand in that area, and most importantly, your exit strategy based on the specific unit you are choosing. So it's not just about saying newer projects are expensive or older projects are better. It's about understanding where the value is relative to the market at that point in time, and also taking advantage of the post-harmonization effect for new projects that buyers can enter at an attractive quantum. What do I mean? So previously, if you have a budget of 2.2 mil and are staying in a 3-bedroom in OCR PPR, if you want to move to a more central location, it will mean a similar budget will get you a 2-bedroom, which entails a smaller unit but better location. But because of post harmonization and the effective floor plate you are paying for doesn't include AC latches anymore, you are paying for the same livable space but at a more attractive quantum. So meaning to say that you can still get a 3-bedroom in RCR today at the same quantum at 2.2 million as well. But what the 30% land base difference means now is this does highlight is that there is currently a price gap in the market right now, and as new projects launch and continue to establish higher benchmarks, that gap will gradually narrow. And if we bring this back to the earlier example I shared, this is exactly how we approach it. So when my client made the move into his next property, we were looking at opportunities in the market before some of the newer land bids in the Newton and Monks Hill area started coming in at around 1820 per square feet PPR. So effectively, we were positioning ahead of where the next benchmark was likely to be. And in markets like these, there are usually windows of opportunity. But the key thing to understand is that this window doesn't stay open for very long. So as new benchmarks are established, right, that gap will gradually narrow. If this is helpful so far, you can consider liking and subscribing as well. I'll continue to share more breakdowns like this so you can stay ahead when making property decisions. Now the fourth concept is leverage. Property allows you to use financing to acquire an asset, which means you are not just using your own capital. So when you use it correctly, right, this can accelerate your capital growth. And at the same time, right, leverage also increases risk, so it needs to be managed carefully. So I also help my clients to plan a safety net and reserves before their purchase itself. So when you bring all these concepts together, asset progression, entry and exit, market cycle, and a leverage, you start to see a pattern. Building capital through property is not just about one perfect decision, it's about making a series of good decisions over time. So each move builds on the previous one, and over time, that's where the growth comes from. So if you're currently thinking about where's your next move, I would encourage you to take a step back and ask yourself this: is this property just a place for me to stay, or is it something that helps you to move forward in the next phase? Because when you combine the right entry with a very clear progression plan, that's where you start to see how capital is built over time. And if you're currently exploring your options and you want to understand what makes sense based on your situation, feel free to reach out to me at 93800434. Happy to walk through it with you on a one-to-one basis. And if you found this helpful, do consider liking and subscribing. I'll continue to share insights like this so you can better navigate the market, also make more informed decisions. Till the next video, bye bye.